Close your eyes and think of an 11-year-old child who has to leave their homeland to move to a foreign country because their parents were going through separation. The child and the mother embark on the journey to that foreign country, arriving in winter, disembarking the plane, walking through all the different twists and turns in the airport, waiting in line nervously, and finally getting to the immigration and the custom official. They present their paperwork, the official looks at the child, stamps the document, and ushers them through. They head to pick up their luggage, walk through to the exit signs and into the arrival area, and there's a sense of relief. They finally arrived. But upon arriving, the child recognizes that they are different than others. How does that child fit in? How does that child belong? How does that child adapt? Now imagine doing this all again at the age of 26. Trust me, it's just as nerve-wracking. Now open your eyes. This isn't a Hollywood movie. It's not a best-selling novel. It's my reality, and it's my story. In 1982, as an 11-year-old boy, I left Nigeria to move to England to commence boarding school. I did this to walk away from the tension in my home through my parental challenges that they were having, to find a way of going to somewhere where there could be calm and peace. But it was this naive decision as that 11-year-old that would form the basis of my understanding of community. That need for community was again realized at the age of 26 when I moved to Canada in 1997. We look around the world today and we are more connected than ever. We ask ourselves, we should be global citizens in our careers, in our jobs, in the news we consume. But we've somehow forgotten to build communities where everyone feels a belonging, where those who are arriving here as newcomers can understand the inclusive social norms, and those who are established here can be open to ideas, new perspective that can help to form those social norms. From a psychological perspective, social norms are the informal behaviors we integrate into our society as members of that community that help govern how we behave, that help set the tone of how we interact. But those social norms take time. They don't just evolve, they take a period of time. As a visible minority arriving in England, I recognize essentially the questions I had to ask, which highlighted I was different. My school leaders were not familiar with the needs of a young 11-year-old black boy. The way my skin interacted in the English cold, the ingredients I needed for my hair, the food and the nuances in boarding school. I recall vividly being recruited to play rugby. Now, rugby was the #1 sport in my school. It brought the community together. I was asked to play with boys 2 years older than me. And for an 11-year-old, that's a leap, and I had no existence of how this game was played. During a very important game, I recall being hurt and feeling extreme pain as the ball crushed into my stomach and I could barely breathe. But it was at that time I recognized that to be accepted, I needed to show grit. I needed to soak it up. Or as the English would say, I need to show that stiff upper lip. Or did I? Many of you in our diverse communities understand what it is to try to soak it up or play the game. And I'm no longer talking about the game of rugby. I'm talking about the game of life. Well, I say to each of us, no more. I am tired of playing that game. It's time for us to look at redesigning our communities where we can build a better tomorrow. Some of you may say, well, those social norms take time. But I hope through this talk today, I'm going to be able to explain to you and engage you that all it takes is one person at a time. And that one person to be able to influence the next person. Redesigning community starts with active participation. It ensures to the fact that we should all invite all of us to participate, to open our viewpoints, engage each other, and bring us into that area that we could find a common ground. If we look and we say to ourselves, diversity and the differences we bring, we should celebrate those. But also remember a fact that the similarities will help bring us together. Because if participation and inclusion can form the social norm, then whatever race, religion, or cultural background we are enhancers and not retractors. We look around the world today in our news and we see many from the same countries disconnected. We see many who are arriving in our countries struggling to be accepted in our communities, and we see those who are established here being intimidated or afraid. So let me ask you, are we really connected? Or are we starting to realize that we are really not? As my journey in Nigeria continued, and I then came over to England, as I mentioned, through that transition, I could tell my accent was now converting from a Nigerian accent to an English accent. And you know what they say? Everything sounds smart when you're English. And I used to get that same reaction. I loved the fact that my accent was moving to English. But then it made me think and wonder, what happens if my accent was a Nigerian accent or any other accent? Would I still be believed to be smart or sound cool or intelligent? Or not? Many of us who are coming here today, accents are judged within that period of time. So I say, we have now looked at a viewpoint of how that accent helps shape us. Studies have shown it takes just 30 milliseconds, 30, for somebody to say hello, for us to make a judgment based on how we sound, how smart you think you are, or where you're from. And I'm going to tell you today, that is ridiculous. And in some cases, there is no awareness of how that makes people feel. It's time for us to state to ourselves, we need to look past that in terms of how that accent will shape us. As my journey continued from Nigeria, then every summer I would go back from England to Nigeria to see my family for 8 weeks. And during the plane ride, the 7-hour plane ride, I was now starting to practice to be able to take my accent from an English accent back to a Nigerian accent. Talk about being confused. The reason I did this was that I wanted to be accepted back in my Nigerian community. And my friends and family could sense the difference in me as I struggled desperately to hold on to my heritage. Today, I still have the struggle in terms of where am I from, in terms of is it a Nigerian community I should be, or is it an English community? But one thing, I am a Canadian, and I'm here today. And most of us in our community also should not have the sense of the feeling of where they need to go from or where they need to come back. Most in our community have heard phrases that you're not a real Canadian, go back to where you came from. I find that interesting. If somebody was to say to me, go back to where you came from, where would that be? It wouldn't be Nigeria. It wouldn't be England. I'm exactly where I should be here in Canada, and so should you. So it's time we start to redesign our community so that we could all feel that inclusion. Now, let me talk about what that should be. Redesigning the community, as I've mentioned, is on active participation, and it means a formula of how I felt over my journey. Volunteerism plus dialogue plus inclusivity will redesign our community. Let me take that through. Step one, volunteering. Whether you're new or established, we can still volunteer. In 2004, my wife challenged me and said, volunteer. I met a young man from Tanzania who reminded me very much of me arriving in Canada in 1997. I spent the next 10 years mentoring, coaching, supporting him, and to see him blossom into somebody who's contributing has been a great feeling for both me and him. The second step of active participation is dialogue. And I'm talking about using and encouraging people in terms of the cultural norms that we don't understand or we take for granted with those who are here. Coming to community events like this, talking to one another, sharing with each other. That will ensure that people feeling a sense of engagement and fulfillment. When I was young, people said, study hard, get good grades. And some of us who are from immigrant or diverse community understand that, what our families say. But no one ever says to us that the community or engaging in the community will also bring success. How many of us truly today know our neighbors or the people we come across the street or we drive our cars, pick up coffee together? For if we can ensure that there's dialogue, then we look to a social and economic benefits that everybody can experience. The third part is inclusivity. Now, I'm not talking about just diversity. I'm talking about two key points, words and home. Saying the right positive words will encourage somebody who's new to feel that they are now included and can call this place a home. So I ask ourselves, isn't it time we started asking these questions and challenging one another? Because community is not a top-down driven institutional approach. There is no one that's going to say redesigning community must come through a certain policy or standard. It's a grassroots movement. And if we start that grassroots movement in talking to one another, then it will spread from here and across the world. And ultimately, isn't the world a larger sense of a community? So I say today, for anyone anywhere listening to this, the call to action is to redesign our community through volunteerism. Redesign our community through dialogue. Redesign our community through inclusivity. Redesign our community one person at a time. Here in DonMills, in Toronto, in Canada, and the rest of the world. Redesign our community through conscious inclusivity, through dialogue for our current generation and our future generation, because we owe it to ourselves of what we have left, that if we do not start taking this change, then we will be defined by an extreme viewpoints, and we will exclude others that provide uniqueness and can shape us in a way where we all feel that we are contributing to this redesigned community. Thank you.